This is Dr. Lisa Rubabi. This is Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists. And today we are doing something a little bit different. We're actually recording a podcast live so that my guest and I can be answering your questions. We hear a lot in the profession about therapists feeling burned out, feeling kind of stuck in their careers after a while. And that is why today I am so excited to speak with Dr. Shannon Jennings, who is a therapist who has made this pivot, becoming an organizational consultant, now moving away from clinical work into consulting psychology. She is the founder of Syncovate, where she works with entrepreneurs and leaders. And she is also deeply involved with the Society of Consulting Psychology, APA's Division 13, where she served as conference co-chair and specializes in helping therapists understand how to leverage their expertise in business context. So today, Dr. J is going to break down exactly how therapists can make this transition and answer your questions about it. So welcome, Dr. Shannon Jennings.
Thank you, Dr. Lisa. And I am so excited to be here to talk about this topic. It is very near and dear to my heart, I think, as you know. My background, actually, even as a child, comes from clinical psychology. My dad was a clinical psychologist who opened the first private practice here in my local area in northern Indiana. And my mom and him actually met at a therapeutic community. So I have grown up in therapy practice, right? It has kind of been my training ground, my nuts and bolts. It is my background. And so coming from that and growing up around psychotherapists and counselors of various kinds and watching them apply their skills in life and in their treatment of people, but just also in their volunteer work and things that they did, I think kind of gave me a perspective about the unique value that people who are trained in therapeutic modalities can bring to other areas that they may not always be thinking about where their skill set can be valued. And so when I joined Division 13 and I started hanging out with all these other psychologists with all kinds of different backgrounds, from clinical, IO, counseling psychology, academics, even military applications, and how they are taking their base understanding of psychological frameworks and applying them in an organizational setting, it lit my brain on fire, because so many of the therapists and psychologists that I know have these amazing things to share with the world, but may not know the pathways to do so, or may even be held back by our training, right, from stepping out into spaces where they are taking a little bit of a risk.
Yeah. Well, that's such a good point. And so you're saying that, you've been around people in this field your whole entire life. And I would imagine that's given you some perspective on how diverse of a profession we're really in. I mean, when you get a degree in therapy, psychology, clinical mental health, you're really acquiring so many fundamentally useful and transferable skills. And that I think, to your point, many therapists don't even recognize the full range of applications that we can cultivate careers in. I mean, I personally never heard anything about business consulting or organizational psychology through two degrees and a fairly extensive career.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I kind of stumbled upon it almost a little bit. Well, it was my career path, right? Like many of us, I'm working in my private practice early on as an LMHC, right? Yeah. I got both of the letters up there because LMHC is Indiana, LPC is Michigan, licensure again. It's just thought I'd throw it up there for this conversation just to clarify for people, right? So I'm early in my career and I am specializing in high conflict divorce and custody cases. That was what I did. We started a nonprofit, my father and I, that still does stuff for advocacy for children going through divorce. And so I'm doing that work. And what the Child Advocate and Divorce Program allowed me to do was work on systems. So we worked with the court. It's a court-ordered program. We coordinated with judges and other city governmental, right, county government, right, because it's through the family court to make this program happen. And that experience, I think, was really systems intervention, and it kind of
Mm-hmm.
got me out of the office.
Yeah.
And that's what led to an opportunity for me working with entrepreneurs. I was invited to work at a place called the Edward Lowe Foundation. Ed Lowe is the inventor of kitty litter. He used to say, if you can make millions of dollars selling dirt in a bag, the free enterprise system is a pretty good
You
system.
can sell socks to a snake. That's right.
And the Ed Lowe story is a very interesting one, just that entrepreneurial journey. But I'll summarize it to you. He didn't feel supported as an entrepreneur. So he left $100 million and 2,600 acres of property to champion the entrepreneurial spirit. And they brought me in to work on their retreats. So they would have groups of leaders come out who are CEOs, owners, presidents of second stage businesses. They'd come out in peer groups of 10 to 15, and we would lead them through leadership retreats. And the foundation really wanted to add components of, wellness, psychology, human behavior, and understanding. They wanted to really deepen how their retreats were influencing leadership. They recognized that leadership was like a human contact sport,
Yeah.
right? And so they brought me into that. And I didn't know nearly as much about business and entrepreneurship then as I do now, right? But it was amazing how folks who were running businesses were incredibly curious, and they wanted this information. They wanted to understand themselves and how they tick and how they think, right? They need to and as the business grows, the pressure grows, and the need for all those things that are around self happen, right? They need to understand their teams and how they work, how people interact in small groups and interpersonal communication and all the things that come with teams. And then as they grow, they need to start thinking about systems, right? How their teams interact with other stakeholders, how they do strategy, how these human systems interact with the business systems. And that is where, again, I just sort of like, oh, I love this. And was able to get into a PhD program, getting my doctorate degree in business psychology, which brought together sort of the MBA strategy, business and financial literacy stuff with the organizational development, IO psychology wing. And that's kind of where I land today. It's a little bit of a hybrid. And again, I think that experience and my curiosity helps me understand, right? And I really want to pull out of people how they can help these systems be better. And I sorry, I'm a little bit of a monologue, but for a lot of people, their work systems suck. If you're on social media, if you're on LinkedIn, you hear a lot of things about, and the videos in particular, those are great, about, how people are really struggling at work.
Yeah.
And I do believe truly that psychologists and therapists have a body of knowledge that can help work suck less, right? Whether that is working one-on-one with a leader or bringing knowledge of things like communication, power dynamics to organizational learning, or even just exposing yourself to understanding the mindset of a business owner so that when they walk into your practice, when you are helping someone, because there are a lot of business owners who also engage in therapy, right? It's actually pretty common amongst a group of folks. And so the more that the therapist can understand the dynamics that happen in the business world and not necessarily have to translate the lingo. I think that there's just a real space for these folks to, there's just so much that comes with being a business owner, having access to a range of service providers, including therapists, is, I think, incredibly important to them running solid organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. That you're saying like the world really needs therapists to be embedded in organizations and working with leaders to help support those systems to be healthy, but also to support the leaders themselves. And so many different applications. Even I'm thinking simple emotional intelligence or communication skills, whereas a therapist who has a good rapport could be like, dude, you're not wrong, but you still can't talk to people that way. Like somebody needs to be able to have those kinds of conversations with a business leader who is receptive to that so that there can be that development. But then, all understanding the way all the different business systems work. And that requires insight into the way people work and good communication skills and being able to develop that kind of emotionally safe relationship with somebody so that you can have those kinds of tough conversations, I would imagine. And therapists are so well suited to do that. Yeah.
And outside of therapy, I think academics, right? People in academia, people who are doing research, there's a space in there too where business leaders need data, they need information, they need research to be done in contexts that allows them to apply that learning into their spaces, right? So if we're talking about something like power dynamics, right, that folks may be researching around, translating that into language that business owners can understand. So, for example, I was working with a group just recently, and it's a group of folks who really hadn't had a conversation when they were building their organization about the underlying power dynamics that happen. And so assumptions were made. And obviously, they were made differently by the individuals because they weren't talking about it. And nobody had, all through the business classes and the things where you're being taught how to set up a business, how to do a business plan, how to set up your accountabilities and org chart. Nobody's putting in that thinking process. Let's talk about power. Let's talk about referent power. Let's talk about all the different ways in which we gain power. Let's talk about carrot and the stick, and how that actually is a dynamic of leadership. And this group was really resistant, right? They're like, I don't want power. I didn't go into this for power. And what we know is whether you like it or not, things that you do and don't do when you are in a position of authority and power, psychologists and therapists are uniquely trained to think about how our personal decisions and things have a power dynamic at play with other people. So being able to kind of bring that into a discussion of leadership and say like, look, saying that there's power dynamics is not saying that you're power hungry. But if you don't recognize these power dynamics, if you don't think about them, they are going to cause harm because of the lack of awareness and the lack of discussion. Imagine a therapist, right, not having thoughtfulness about the power dynamic that they bring when they walk into a room. We have to think about that. And leaders have to think about that also. But being able to bridge those kinds of ahas, right, is just a language that maybe is kind of cool to bring to business leaders because they're so smart. They're so hungry for information and you give them these things and it's like, you just watch this magic happen. And it's like, by the end of the thing, it's like, okay, we have to nail down these accountabilities. Here's what we got to do. And you're like, great, let's make it happen. And you can maybe do some steps. You can maybe let them go with it. But to be able to combine these two worlds, again, it's just alchemy. It's magic that creates new things, which is what gets me really excited about the work and really excited about opening up the conversation in two directions, I hope to do, right? Which is folks in the world of mental health and therapy, understanding and being okay with organizational life, right? And understanding that those people have a place in the world and it's really important to help them, but also helping the general public and business leaders understand the world of like psychologists and therapists are not just cognitive behavioral talk therapy or not just, the stuff you hear about psychodynamic on the couch with Freud, that there are so many different areas of expertise. And it actually, Dr. Lisa, it's one of the things in that presentation I do on everything you wanted to know about coaching, but we're afraid to ask. One of the slides and deepest part of the conversations is what's the difference between a therapist and a coach? And a lot of things you see out there are going to say things that are very generic, like therapy is past focused and coaching is future focused. Yeah, I know that's where we kind of connected to begin with, because that's just not true. And I don't think people, I assume the good, right? And so I don't think people are trying to cause harm by boiling it down to that. But if you know anything about the different types of modalities of, therapy and counseling, then you realize that that's just not a true statement. The diversity of therapists out there is incredible. And so these assumptions of who can help with what are really tricky because they really take education, talking, conversations, people referring to each other. And even maybe sometimes, psychologists and therapists might not always have clarity on, even within our own profession.
Absolutely not. And why would they? Because I feel like they're just, at least in my experience, developing, going to school, developing that there were like rooms in the house that I didn't even know existed until many years later. And these business applications and certainly coaching too is one of them. So, okay. So let me ask you this. I frequently talk to therapists. A part of what I do in my role these days, connecting with clinicians often who are at a fork in the road moment in their own professional trajectory. They have oftentimes been doing clinical mental health work for a period of time and are either bored, they're burnt out, time for something different. And so discussing options. And so for me, I help therapists become board certified coaches, but many of them express an interest in doing some type of organizational work on the other side of that. And I think that's a good idea to have like coaching competencies. But then they're like, I want to be an executive coach. I want to do business consulting. I want to be involved with leadership or organizational consulting. And there's a lot of curiosity there around, so what do I need to know? What do I need to learn? Because the other thing, like lots of transferable skills, but in my experience, at least, most therapists don't know about many of the things that you're discussing related to organizational design, operations, the finance, unless they had previous experience in business before they became therapists. So I'd love to unpack your advice around, what would you tell a therapist who was interested in moving into organizational coaching or leadership consulting? Where would they start?
And that was definitely where I was early on, right? I mean, other than the experience running a small private practice, I had not had a lot of business experience. And even the language and the words that are used in business were unfamiliar to me. I did not understand what strategy was, even, how the value chain works within an organization, right? Just like the stuff that I've acquired over the years took a lot of learning to do. And so for me, I think about what do you already know and understand about business? Who is already, or organizations, right? I want to be clear. It doesn't necessarily have to be for-profit business. A lot of nonprofits and government agencies can also use our support. And that was actually one of the things I learned at SCP is some of the folks who are doing in particular work with local governments and so forth, and how they do the RFP process, which was something I learned about from the society because I had never done like an RFP before. Like, oh, tell me about that.
If it's okay, just for our listeners, because you're right, there is a lot of lingo. So break it down. SCP, RFP for people who have not been indoctrinated. What are we talking about?
So SCP is the Society of Consulting Psychology. It is a division of the APA, and it is an amazing society and community of people who are doing consulting psychology work in all kinds of different settings. So that's who they are. And it's an incredible resource, right? If you are a psychologist, especially if you're already in APA and you're thinking about moving into this area, one really easy place to start is join and attend some of our free events, pop in, because you'll get a feel for what other people are doing. And people are incredibly generous in that community just to talk to you and talk about what they do and ask questions about what it is that you do. And then RFP is request for proposal, right? And so that's when an agency or group puts out a request for people to submit proposals, right? And they match up to different work that can be done. And so it might be something like they need concrete poured, but it could also be they need leadership training or a meeting schedule or conflict resolution, right? So these things, RFPs can come in all different shapes and forms. And so that's one type of business that people can go into, is looking at things that people may need, particularly around some training area, conflict resolution. Those may be things that you're already doing.
Okay, so you're saying that there's a situation where you can see like incoming requests for help from different
Yes,
businesses, and then be able to say, "Oh, I can do that." So
that's
maybe if you don't have all of the business, everything like conflict resolution, send me in, like
yeah,
that.
that's
Okay,
out there,
okay,
especially with like government organizations and
yeah,
nonprofits. It's not my area of expertise, but there are people in SCP for whom it is.
yeah,
And so that's one way. And like, so again, one of the early areas of work I did when I was
hmm
bridging these two professions, was I worked with the emergency call center in our area, right? And so that was a little bit organizational, but it was also a little bit EAP, right? So what we did was think about how to handle some immediate trauma situations that happened and do the debrief, but also how to restructure some things so that they had a system in place when future things
yeah.
happened. So they knew how to engage immediately without waiting for that external EAP person to come in.
That's
So
awesome.
so that's an example that's a kind of a natural fit for a
hmm
lot of people in therapy already,
Yeah,
to think about where are the wellness things happening or the crisis things happening, that people already look at you and say, your area of expertise matches up with what I'm looking for.
right.
But you have to put yourself kind of out there as someone who does that, whether that's through marketing or networking. And that's one area. Executive coaching is an area where I think it's best to have a really strong understanding of how business works, right?
Let's talk more
Um,
about that, because I also have therapists
mhm,
and they toss around the idea executive coaching, and I mean this, I like love them, but they don't really know what it means. I think the
mhm,
way that somebody who is operating really as an executive coach often does it. And so can you just unpack this? The goal is to
yes.
create visibility into what this actually involves. Yeah.
Well, and again, I love this question
hmm
because there are two ways I think about it. There's your world of small businesses,
Right.
right? Your privately held individuals, or they might have 10 employees, they might have a few hundred employees, maybe even a couple thousand,
Mm,
but they're privately held and oftentimes family owned, or there's a small group of people that own the business. And then there is executive coaching in the corporate world,
mm,
right? Where people are working in large corporate organizations. And very often they're coaching, engaging larger organizations that bring coaches in from various backgrounds. And so they're actually two different worlds of business to understand, I think. Though the skills, again, it's translatable. But for me, I specialize in those mid-market companies that are privately held, because that's the world that I decided I really want to understand what these folks go through,
and they
right?
need
And so if you
help.
want to, yeah, and they need help. And if it's the other executives, then you really want to understand what their pressures and worlds are, and they are different, right? So in the corporate world, oftentimes the executive pressures are coming from up or external, right? It might be coming from your board, it might be coming from shareholders. A lot of the pressures are in that bucket. But for me, when I'm working with small business owners, a lot of the pressures are around, how do I make sure I have built this thing? 500 people rely on me, 150 people rely on me. If I mess it up, bad things are going to happen. And so their pressures are really about maintaining the organization, how to keep the business going. And so they are, again, just the sort of understanding where their pressures come from is one step in the right direction. But then understanding how their businesses tick, how they make money, how they think about things, right? And so, um, again, some of it is just going out there and finding coursework on some basic business stuff or talking to people who know business. Like, what is strategy?
Yeah.
What is, a top line versus bottom line? What are operations? What are the major business units that exist out there? And some of this we already know. Some of this we can learn from resources that are available to us. Some of this is just like, hey, I know some people. Let me go talk to them. And
Yeah.
that's I think the thing people miss is just go talk to the people in your life who you know who are employees or owners and ask them, what are some of the things that about your business? Listen when your friends and family and people you know are talking about their
Yeah.
experience because you're behind closed doors in the office. Your world is different.
Right.
Listen to what they're talking about. Listen to what their stresses are. Listen to what their pressures are.
Yeah.
Ask them questions about what's an RFP. Tell me more. That's one of the things I've had to do is just try to develop a network of people that teach me about the things about like business or industries that I might not know about.
Yeah.
But again, it's like the big buckets are going to be like, what's happening in HR? Like, what do HR leaders care about? What's important for a business in developing their people? I got to know a little bit about how businesses make money, right? And you gotta know about cash flow. Like, I got to understand the words around cash flow, like balance sheet. I got to understand what those things, margins. I got to understand what that
Yeah.
language is, right? Then there's kind of the operations bucket, right? Which is a little bit more complicated, but it's like how we get things done within the organization.
Right.
And then there's just sort of the pure leadership stuff. And that may not, again, that's just off the top of my head, right? But like you don't necessarily have to learn everything, but if you pick an area of interest and kind of dive into that, you might find I can learn that language really quickly. Yeah, was that too much? I feel like I went on a little
No,
bit of a tangent
no,
there.
but I mean, I think you just shared a lot. And I think the headline here is that you really do need to educate yourself on different, aspects of business, different types of business. I mean, even to your point about the difference between a corporate versus a environment versus a small business. I mean, corporate environment, there's unlimited resources, right? Where
Mhm.
you have a small business with this guy who's like, receptionist just walked off the job. I mean, like it's just very
Yes.
different. And the problems at these different levels are quite different, but also like
Mhm.
really needing to understand how businesses work, like parts of a business, how they work together, that are really above and beyond just the human dynamics that
Yes.
therapists come into this being most comfortable with. And so again,
Yes.
while we have so many transferable skills, um, there is also a growth opportunity. Now, aside from come and do conflict resolution, come in and, I had the
Hmm.
opportunity, I guess it was last year, was hired by a big accounting firm to come in and do a presentation on emotional intelligence. It was so
Exactly.
much fun. So like there's a sort of limited engagement as opposed to executive coaching, which is a bigger
Exactly.
deal.
It's
Yeah.
a bigger
Yeah.
deal. It's harder to get in
Mm-hmm.
unless you already maybe have some background that helps you do that. And for
Yeah.
some of us, that's building our own private practice, right? For
Mm-hmm.
some people who maybe have built a large practice, in particular, they already have a lot of business experience from their own that's transferable. Maybe you grew up in a family business and became a
Yeah.
therapist, right? And so I think therapists, psychologists, we often undervalue what it is that we actually know. I mean, so if there's anything
Yeah.
if there was one thing I would hope people take away, it's like you already do know so much. All I'm really saying is listening and learning is going to help you develop a new vocabulary that helps you translate. I mean, it's a lot of what you're doing is translation of words from this section to this section. Again, I was talking with another business psychologist just yesterday, and they're doing some work around burnout,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to give away too much on their upcoming project. They asked me to kind of bounce some ideas on, and they're doing some stuff, presentations and so forth for similar kinds of groups on things like burnout and triggers that are happening in context emotionally, right? And they want to develop this. as we talk through it, it's like we have the ability to develop this tool that's not generic. That's not, here's how you generally deal with burnout. It can be really specific around here's how you deal with burnout within this industry or within this role that people have, because we understand the role of executive or we understand the role of IT, whatever our expertise might be. But in this case, it's also, here's how we use like business language to translate some things that you might find in like a CBT workbook put out by a therapist. If you understand and you know business, you can change the language of just how we are kind of introducing the activity, the scenarios that we're choosing for people to process that make it business applicable, not, treating diagnosable situations, but teaching people about managing emotion, teaching people how to deal with their, small a anxiety, right? And so those things, right, we may already have the ability to translate. And sometimes it's literally talking to each other that helps us realize what we already know.
And this is such a helpful explanation. I mean, and even just you going into some of what this can be, right, from the inside, I think is so helpful for many therapists who are, with us right now and who haven't, realized that the world also needs them to be serving in these kinds of roles, or has been curious about it, but wondering like, what is this exactly? And so one of the things that I so deeply appreciate about you and your work, Dr. Shannon, is that you have such a heart for helping therapists moving into this space. And so you are teaching therapists and giving presentations. And I also understand that you're developing communities for therapists who are seeking to move into this space so that there is support. Because the other thing that's coming up for me as you're talking is like, unless you choose to go into like an IO type degree program or pursue this through education, like where else do therapists get the consultation, the support, the advice to make this career path pivot?
There aren't a lot of spaces, right? The Society of Consulting Psychology tries to create one. There are definitely spaces around coaching certifications, like you mentioned, right? Both within specifically for therapists, which I think is amazing, the area. I think more people need to know about that. But then the sort of big brand names out there doing coaching certification. And so there are communities built around sort of the coaching side, but not so much with communities of therapists. And honestly, I think it's even for folks who are just doing therapy, when you're solo and not part of an organization, it can be an incredibly lonely job. Totally. And so that's one of the reasons I actually love this work, is because it lets my my extrovert side really come out and engage in community and in groups. Like, I gotta say this, and this is the sort of like, people don't always like this take from me.
We're getting real. I love it.
This is a tough one.
Okay.
But here's the thing that I say to therapists, and I'm probably going to get some hate on this, but if we don't get out there, other people will, right? If it's not us, it's going to be some other guru who read an article in Psychology Today and is now presenting it for $10 million, Right. Like, the thing is the space is already being filled up. The coaching space is being filled up. The consulting space is being filled up. These are unregulated spaces.
Right.
And they are going to be filled up by the best marketers, the best packagers, the best social media folks. That's who are going to get the sales. If we don't, as a group, gather together and be more intentional about educating the public. And I don't mean that to say that there's not coaches out there who are incredibly qualified. There are. But there are also coaches out there who took a program,
or
ran
not.
a course, or
horrifying,
or ran something through ChatGPT, and they can build a great funnel and understand email marketing. And next thing you know, they're the folks who are doing this work. And so it's almost an ethical like
Right.
mission for me, again, is
Totally.
not to put down the coaches who are doing the great work, but to make sure that there is enough folks in this space that understand it, so that, again, I talk to coaches who don't want to do harm, wonderful people, and they want to know, they want to
Totally.
have somebody they can talk to, so they know if they're getting close to being over the line, if they're inching towards something that they should refer out to therapy or not talk about. Again, family dynamics is one of them, right? I can tell you about a coach I heard about. I don't know this person, but the client came to me because their previous coach had crossed the line into what I would call family systems therapy, that was unhelpful to this group. Even if the coach had diagnosed it right, and without the other training, et cetera. And again, I don't necessarily think that they did. I can't say whether they did or they didn't, right? But when this group came to me, it was clear that their harm had been done by folks practicing outside of their scope, right? And I
Absolutely.
and I I assume that person did not know that. I assume that they did not intend to cause harm and step out. I assume that they took the best knowledge that they had, saw something happening, and tried to be helpful. But because they were unclear where that line was, they accidentally stumbled and gave harm. And so those are the kinds of things that I want folks in this field to know about, even if they just are like creating stuff to support coaches so that they can be more
Yeah.
qualified, whether they're life coaches, executive coaches, somatic coaches, whatever they call themselves. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like, let's bring some education. Let's bring our knowledge, but also let's educate the public so that they don't accidentally engage with things that seem really cool on the surface and are well marketed, but might not have the the underpinning support
Yeah.
from theory and research.
Absolutely. And that there are so many risks involved. And I could tell you so many horror stories about people who have decided that they are coaches and now qualified to treat complex trauma, complex PTSD, eating
Yeah.
disorders. I mean, like, it gets so scary. So I'm right there with you. But I love what you say, that therapists and psychologists must be represented in these roles, in organizational consulting, in going into businesses and helping strengthen leaders, systems, teams, and certainly in the coaching space, because we have this foundational understanding of things that people without our training and experience really don't. And so if we're not in these spaces, they are going to be occupied by somebody with a fraction of your training and experience and competence. And that is such a loss for maybe the organization or the leader that hires them, but also for so many therapists who would really enjoy doing this type of work and don't even
Yeah.
know that it's an option for them.
Yeah.
So I think that is also why I am so passionate about helping therapists learn coaching competencies in an
Hmm.
organized way. But I just could not agree with you more. I think a space for therapists to be in a leadership position when it comes to creating some kind of channels for non-therapist coaches to have access to consultation, because that is how I think we can also work to keep the public safe
Hmm.
professionally, because you're right. I think so many people are really well-meaning, but they don't even know what they don't know. And so to have
Hmm.
access to a psychologist or a therapist, like, what do you think about that? That's really important.
And again, it's something I
Yeah.
learned from community, right?
Yeah.
I'm actually in a writers group.
Oh.
My friend Jane Lockhart, who is a coach who specializes around women's issues like menopause and
Mm-hmm.
PCOS, and her coaching is really specific around navigating the healthcare system, how to talk to your doctor, but also wellness stuff and like food and exercise around these very specific things. that's a pretty safe space to be. It's very, very specialized. She has
Mm-hmm.
gone out and educated herself deeply about that, as well as had her own experience. But she also consults with me, right? And so through that space, I'm a sounding board for her. And now we've kind of developed a group of some other folks that attend the writing hour who are doing similar kinds of things where they're going out and sharing their knowledge, and they want to check things out sometimes or have someone to talk to. And I can't tell you how many times those conversations have really felt to me very positive, because they're helping this person not be a better coach, but also then their coachee have a better experience.
Yeah.
And so just learning that has exposed me to this idea that actually there are a lot of coaches who want this, right? There are those who are maybe in unethical places, in our opinion, right? Who are maybe moving into spaces that are regulated and are technically therapy. And so obviously we should all, I believe we should stand up against allowing people to slide
Absolutely.
into regulated spaces who are unregulated.
Vocally.
There's also a lot of other coaches out there who really want to stay within an ethical space, but don't necessarily know how to reach out or where we might be available to help and coach. But we have to understand each other's world to help each other. And here's another thing. I just hit this on the other day. I'm following my social media, and I realize most of these folks are women. Most of the folks that I end up following and ended up in my social media feed who are coaches are women. Now, of course, that's my feed, and I know there's a chunk of men out there doing coaches, but there's a lot of women in this area. And there's a lot of women, right? We know that psychotherapy, APA skews female, right? And so the profession skews female. And so we're talking essentially about, in a large way, women trying to make their way in this world, trying to do well and do good, and navigate some of these boundaries in ways that are maybe different than other people have in the past. And so when I started thinking about that, it sort of was like a powerful to me thought about how do we as a group support and help each other so that we can be successful in these endeavors while keeping out the stuff that is, again, unethical and crossing boundaries, right? So I don't want to hate on some, single solopreneur woman who's trying to, build an ethical coaching practice or an ethical consulting practice. Any more than I would want to hate on a woman therapist building that, right?
Sure.
Weird thought. I don't know. It just was hitting me as I was kind of seeing this conversation in social media that's evolving, where the kind of coaches and therapists are not super happy with each other. There's some unhelpful dialogue on social media. Right now.
Well, and people like me, a coaching psychologist, everybody's mad at me. So,
Yes, I know. I think everybody's probably mad at me too, right?
That's okay.
And that's why I want to walk that line to just say, there's places for lots of different things, but we have to be in conversation. We have to be thoughtful. We have to be aware, and that's not easy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for floating that. But, even too, I think you just opened another door for therapists tuning into this who are thinking how else can I use my skills and abilities in a different way? If I'm thinking about a career path pivot, we certainly talked about organizational coaching and consulting, and probably some therapists listening to that were like, that's a lot, because it is. Mm-hmm. But even what you're just saying now, doing, this is the wrong way to say it, but I'm thinking of clinical supervision for non-therapist coaches, not clinical supervision, but
right. It's not clinical. But
no.
But building on that type of model.
Exactly.
Right?
Because that's so gratifying for so many therapists to be in that mentorship role, but then also to not have your license on the line, ideally.
Yes. And look,
amazing.
I think coaches, again, this is one of the key things about being a coach or a consultant. And this is probably something that therapists should know, right? When you are building a coaching or consulting practice, it's incredibly important to build a network of people around you who fill in the gaps of the things that you don't know, right? I don't try to do the things that my CPA referral sources do, right? Like I don't try to do their books. I don't try to do their taxes. I don't try to do their, HR compliance stuff or their recruitment. Like that's somebody else's job. But my job is to build that network of people that are around me so that I can connect people to those resources, but I can also go to those resources and have conversations so that I learn. Or some of it is what do you do so that I know when to send people to you. But within that conversation, I become more educated, right, about the ecosystem. Yeah. And so it's like, I think having folks who are mentors, coaches in different fields are important to this. And so if I, when I'm doing my coaching, I have people around me, even though I brand myself really as a trusted advisor, coaching is really a piece of the larger trusted advisor model that I use. But having that group of folks around me is what allows me, I think, to stay within my scope, but also provide a great deal of value to my clients. And so if for anybody in the clinical space who's thinking about coming out into this world, one of the early steps you can do is just start building your network of people. Who do you already know? Who do you already trust? Who's a lawyer that works with businesses? Who do you know in the accounting space that works with businesses? Because they're going to be your referral sources largely anyway for a lot of this stuff. And so maybe talking to them can be a good place to start.
Yeah. That networking is key, and that, diversity of thought, and to expand your circle to allow this kind of fresh perspective. Dr. Shannon Jennings, could you just speak a little bit more about some of the opportunities that you have for therapists or even coaches to connect, develop their network, have a consultation partner, have somewhere to go to get their questions answered, maybe get some direction, because I love this part of your mission, and I'd love to give you the chance to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, so on the big picture, right, definitely for psychologists, the Society of Consulting Psychologists, go check them out. Find me there. You're going to find me doing all kinds of things. I'll be speaking in February.
I'm going to be there with Nelson. I can't wait.
So we're going to have our conference in Las Vegas in February, and I'm going to be doing an experiential learning component with Dr. Daniel Lattimore that I'm incredibly excited about. So it's going to be sort of a train the trainer meta experience where you'll walk away with not just a tool that you can use in coaching and consulting practice, but also an understanding of how the experiential learning thing was built. So check us out over there. Drop in at some of our lunch hours and stuff. Now, from Sync of Eight, and largely, from the encouragement of folks like Dr. Lisa and others, I'm creating a space right now. It's just sort of in a wait list. Come on in. I'm building two things, right? One is like a community space where we can come together, and that's going to start with very simple office hours with Dr. J. You're not going to need to sign up. You're not going to need to make a commitment. I'm starting that in 2 weeks. We're going to push it out on LinkedIn and socials. Hopefully we can put it in the comments. And so really that's just going to be an open space for an hour for people to drop in. If you have questions, we're going to have a conversation. It's not going to be live. It's not going to be recorded. But it can't be totally private either because it's just drop in. So it's kind of that hybrid thing. And then the other is building a little bit more of a formal community space where we can come together, that will build into the formal community space where we can come together and help each other out in a sort of peer group kind of way.
Where do people learn more about you? Where would they connect with you? I mean, LinkedIn, obviously.
Dr. Shannon Sheehan Jennings, right, on LinkedIn. That's one of the best ways to connect with me. Of course, I have my website. It's sync08llc.com. But for the people who maybe know me a little bit and might have showed up to check me out, but don't know as much about you, in particular, how you help therapists move into this area and the certification and the specific programs that you do, would you be open to just telling me a little bit more about that? So I make sure as I go along, I connect people up to this, because I think it's it's a hidden, amazing resource that I don't understand why I didn't know more about until I met you. Like it
Oh,
was a total blind spot, and now I know, and I want everybody to know.
oh my God, you're so kind to ask. You are so sweet. Well, but I think that this is also like a good role modeling of how do we help each other? You know, like being curious about what other people do and then connecting, you know, because I've actually started referring so many therapists to you and to SEP who are like, I want to learn about executive coaching. Like, I don't do that. So I'm like,
Mhm.
go talk to Shannon. But so I mean, I'm doing a few things right now. And so, yes, part of what I'm very passionate about is helping licensed therapists transition into coaching and actually become certified coaches through the NBCC. So to become a board certified coach, because there are many coaching specific competencies that therapists really don't know. And I found that many therapists think that they know more about coaching than they actually do, which
Mhm.
can be problematic. But also therapists can run into some pretty dicey legal and ethical gray areas if they don't have a lot of clarity about the differences, but also the protection of a formal credential. And the BCC is definitely the gold standard for therapists because
Mhm.
therapists can become certified coaches through a 30-hour training program as opposed to a
Mhm.
60-hour because it's happening through the National Board for Certified Counselors, which shocks
Mhm.
many therapists to even know.
Yeah, it surprised me.
I know people are like,
Mhm.
wait, what? So anyway, that is something that I'm really passionate about because at this point, something like 50% of clients who are showing up into a private practice do not have clinical mental health symptoms. They're coming in to get help in changing an outcome in some aspect of life. And what therapists often do is not necessarily related to achieving an outcome. We
Yeah.
diagnose and treat clinical mental health treatment, or we help people get insight. So a coaching model is really helpful there. But another thing that I've been
Yeah.
doing on another aspect of it is really in alignment with where you're going. So for many years, I've run a group practice of counseling and coaching, but have had, you know, upwards of 60 therapists running around my practice. And it's been very therapist first. So we're doing
Mhm.
continuing education internally. We're doing consultation groups and support groups for clinicians, working with therapists to develop like private practice competencies that
Yeah.
they often don't have coming into
Yeah.
an agency environment. So like, how do we help make things easier and better feeling for professional therapists? And so what I have been thinking about recently is how do we transition that so that a therapist can access that type of support without having to join a group practice, because
Yeah.
that can be expensive. It's a big commitment, all the things. And so I'm calling this the Growth Collective, where we're creating community, continuing education, consultation about different things, including just how to operate as a private practitioner successfully. And that is not specific to therapists that coach. That is also therapists who are doing a more conventional mental
Yeah.
health space.
Such a huge area.
I think
Again, we
so.
could do a whole podcast
I
just
know.
on the business and
Yeah,
even just whether the how to understand how to run your own business, how to promote, what kind of insurance you need,
totally.
all the how to run your books, right? All
So
the
many
things that are in running a
questions.
practice,
Mm-hmm.
getting impaneled, that is specific to us.
Yeah.
But even just that systems level that you mentioned around, there's this real challenge where a lot of folks who come in for therapy are not going to fall into the diagnosis, and they want to
Yeah.
use their insurance and they want to do these things. And again, this is a whole nother podcast that we all
Yeah.
kind of who are coming to this from therapy are pretty aware of. And so it's like, I get really excited, and I'm excited to know that,
Yeah.
because it is a critical component of this whole thing that we've been talking about, which is really more your area of expertise that you've been teaching me about, which is that there are these pathways for therapists that exist, and that people totally need to connect up with Dr.
Well,
Lisa.
but that's
I
the
wish I would have
thing.
met you and did your
Oh,
coursework like 15, like a decade ago. I think it would have helped me accelerate my learning process to where I am now, even with all the academic training and experience. Just our conversations and learning about these things have been an incredible boost. And I wish I would have had it sooner. So,
I
if you're
feel the
thinking
same
about
about
it,
you.
call Dr. Lisa,
I
connect
feel,
up
but
with
like
her.
you're such a wealth of information around like what do you need to know to operate in organizational environments effectively? Like you say things that I haven't thought of before. And so, but this is why like we need community. We need to be connecting with each other. And I think as a culture, therapists tend to be quite isolated. We're
Yes.
siloed. We're, I mean, especially when I was in solo private practice, I would only see my clients all day long. And so,
Yes.
but it requires stepping out, reaching out to Dr. Shannon on LinkedIn, saying hi to me on LinkedIn. Like who are my people that are in
Yeah.
alignment with the future I want to create? So Dr. Shannon Jennings, this has been such an inspiring conversation. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. These conversations are incredibly valuable, Dr. Lisa, and I'm honored. I'm grateful to be on your podcast and keep doing what you're doing. We need more of you out there.
Well, likewise. And for anybody who's interested in learning more about this whole space, a quick plug for the Division 13 of the APA conference, the Society for Consulting Psychology, conferencing in Las Vegas this year in February.
That is correct.
Come and hang out with me and Dr. Shannon in Las Vegas.
Yes.